Legal Limelight is back. Thank you, everyone. Welcome to our show where we spotlight industry leaders who are crushing it in their industry, and a lot of them actually use intellectual property to create wealth and live the life of their dreams. So today's guest is my good friend, Veronica. Hey, Veronica. She's also known as the Curator Counsel. I am going to add you. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
I'm so good. It's been forever.
I know. Been too long. It's just been crazy over here. How are you?
I'm really well. I want to give a proper introduction to you. So, everyone, this is Veronica. Veronica Ramirez is the founder of Curator Counsel, a firm dedicated to providing effective legal representation, and I want to get all this right, for the creative set. Since launching her firm in 2021, she's represented numerous creators in life-changing brand partnerships and empowered her clients to protect their creative works and their brands. Prior to launching her firm, she worked at a medium-sized firm as a commercial litigator. There, she recognized the importance of having a stellar legal team and thought it was time to blend her interest in influencer marketing and the law to advocate for creators. Oh my gosh, Veronica, 2021.
Yeah, it's unreal to think that was not that long ago, but also like it feels like a lifetime ago just because so much has changed, so much has happened. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine, even in your time, as just looking at your legal journey, I'm just like, I'm continuously inspired. So,
yeah. Well, I remember that's how we met. Like,
yeah,
I think we met right when you left. You basically reached out to me and said you're super interested in this area and you wanted to learn. So you got on, can we talk a little bit about that? Like what inspired you to do what you're doing now and how did you start?
Yeah. So I know I've talked about this like before, but it's so interesting to think about it again because it's been, I guess, a really long time since I've really like looked back on like where I was when I first reached out to you. And that was kind of like a huge transition period for me. But my interest in working with creators, I think, dates back even further because I've always had an interest as a communications major in undergrad and even in law school, like working on a note that really was about the FTC's regulations on influencers. And my whole shtick was about like how they regulate affiliates. I took a really interesting position, contrary to what the FTC, does. But I was really interested, and that's really where I first found that the law intersected with something that I was so, I guess, engaged in, as a consumer, right? I really love following creators and hearing what they have to say and seeing them engage in different products, product activations, etc. But I didn't really think, again, this is a limiting belief thing, but I didn't think it was possible to get into this field with where I was. I mean, I was going to school in Syracuse. So, with that, you kind of are like limited in some ways about like where you are geographically. I knew I was coming back to Binghamton because I had a husband.
Pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID.
So I had a husband who was working in Binghamton, had a secure job here. So it was just like, I had to be realistic and I had to be practical about what I could actually do after law school. But COVID happens and I was a commercial litigation associate at a medium-sized firm and not super fulfilling. Like I learned a lot from all the attorneys that I had the opportunity to work with, and I will never not be grateful for that. But I think
it wasn't exciting.
Like at all. It wasn't nearly as exciting as uttering the sentence of, I think I want to start my firm and I think I want to represent creators. And my husband being like, okay, then do it.
Wow. Okay. So that's awesome. Like he was all for it right at the beginning.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
It was actually so funny because I was so afraid. And, when you're married, right, you're not just thinking about you anymore. Like you're thinking about, okay, how does this affect our lifestyle? And, luckily, again, we live in Binghamton. It's not exactly a huge or expensive city to be living in the first place. So he was like, okay, like, let's just do it, see how it shakes out. And, you know, if it's a flop, luckily it was a sleigh, then we can kind of continue this and just see where it takes you. So I started by reaching out to attorneys like you in the field because it's a huge switch. It's a huge transition. And I had to network, and I have to, you know, make myself known to people that are trusted in this industry, and of course do my homework. Yeah. So I enrolled in courses, I took CLEs, I, you know, did all that I could to kind of get up to speed and stay up to date with what's happening in the influencer marketing space, creator economy, etc. And I started on social media. I use social media to my advantage, and I use it at the right time because Clubhouse. I mean, Clubhouse. You know, I'm not there as much anymore. If any, to be honest, I'm not. I haven't been back since last summer. Really. Yeah. But that's where I got my start. That's how we all met. Right. And it was just like, it was so amazing to be part of something like that and in that time, because I got to connect and really demonstrate my interest, my knowledge, and really connect with people a little more on a personal level. There's only so much you can accomplish, you know, here, even on Instagram or TikTok. I hadn't really like mastered that part yet, and I don't even profess to master it now. But I think that I really am great face-to-face, one-on-one, and an audio live situation, because you're catching me just like as it's happening. Yeah, you're authentic too. I think that's really important. And so when you started on Clubhouse and you started building a business, what were the things that converted for you? Like what were the things that you were like, wow, okay, I need to do more of that because I'm actually getting clients? Yeah, I think that the biggest thing for me was to really be of service to people. So doing panels or participating in panels that related to influencer marketing, brand deals, and even a little bit of IP helped the most. Yeah. Because again, it's where potential clients and creators that may know other creators that I could help heard me and referred me to their network. And that helped the most for me. Eventually, you know, with Clubhouse dying, right? So I had to kind of like notice like where the people were. Yeah. Then that's where I had to shift my interest and shift my focus to other platforms like Instagram and TikTok. I've seen a lot of TikTok. Yeah, I've seen some conversion there, which is really cool. But again, I'm still learning and I'm still figuring it out. But I would say that it's been social media plus referrals have been like the two main sources, which has been so great because it really, you know, helps build my confidence as an attorney to, you know, be able to say, I know what I'm talking about, and I've achieved success before with other clients, and I'm hoping that I can do the same for you. So I'm really just grateful. And right now it's just transactional, or are you exploring litigation? It's just going to be transactional. Okay. You're done. I'm done. I'm done. And I have huge respect and admiration for people that are in litigation. I still think that there's so much value in being a litigator, even at the beginning. Hey, Levi. So I really think that even as a new attorney, I would recommend that being part of like somebody's like plan, right? Is to kind of get familiar with that, because then you know how to basically frame contracts or set yourself up to avoid litigation as much as you can, right? I was just doing a contract all this morning, and I'm like, I don't have litigation experience. So what I do is I get the litigator to look at it. And I'm like, what do you think if I write this? And you know, most of the time it's fine, but sometimes there's really nuances. So having that experience, I agree, is like really incredible. Yeah, I totally agree too. And it's just, you know, I remember when I was, you know, making the transition, I was like, oh, man, like, am I really gonna, like, how much of it am I gonna reference, like, you know, in my practice going forward? Because it's not even related. Like, I was working on construction litigation
Yeah.
issues. And you would think like those things would never like kind of come up again.
Yeah, but the law's the law. Like,
Right. So it's been really fascinating to kind of see, well, like, oh yeah, this kind of reminds me of this. And like, then we had to kind of like, you know, worry about this. So it's really interesting to see how anything, you could really draw from anything to.
so what kind of stuff are you working on?
So a lot of my practice centers on brand deals because that is, I think, the bread and butter for a lot of creators.
Tell us more. Like, what do you mean in terms of a brand deal?
Yeah, so brand deals really relate to a couple things. So the first is you'll probably see on your any app, any social media app, an influencer endorsing a specific product or service of a brand. Okay. And you'll probably see something like ad, paid partnership, you know, affiliated with those specific posts, because that basically says that the brand is paying that person in exchange for that endorsement. And that's going to happen in a post, blog post, Pinterest, idea pin, like it really can't range. Okay. So part of my practice is, you know, again, advising creators about, hey, you know, your contract says XYZ about usage, or we kind of really get into what the terms say and whether or not that closely reflects what's negotiated first. And then we kind of I expand that into other things like, okay, what kind of liability exposure are we looking at? What kind of representations and warranties are being made here? And whether or not that's, you know, kind of being mirrored by the brand too, right?
The stuff that no influencer like actually, because it's another language. I mean, representations, warranties, indemnities, like these are terms that you need a lawyer, like you need an advocate.
Yeah, you do. And it's really interesting to see how a lot of that stuff can be ignored, right? And to have to, you know, basically give people a fake scenario that is probably not likely to happen, but is a non-zero chance anyway, so we have to consider it, is very interesting to see the reactions that creators will have. You know, like if you get injured or if something happens, like, you know, I kind of come up with these ridiculous scenarios to be like, this could happen. Like, this could mean that you are on the hook for this, or this could mean that you fall short and that they can invoke an indemnity, you know, situation here. Like, it's very illuminating. And that really is part of like the most, like one of the most fulfilling parts of my job is like educating people and getting people on the same page about what they're seeing in their contracts and being aware of those things.
A lot of the times, is it that for the brands, they have their own influencer agreements that they then give to influencers, and you're reviewing and revising those?
Yeah, exactly. So it's very, very, very rare that a brand is not prepared with a contract of their own. It's usually that we're just negotiating off of their working document. So with that in mind, it's never going to be, you know, favorable or balanced, right? Like,
absolutely. Yeah. And like, I do some influencers, but definitely a lot of most of my clients are really the brand based. And so that's what I'll do is I'll audit their contracts if they have them. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they're awful still. Like you would think these businesses are big companies and they have everything buttoned up, but I've seen some interesting things. So, and you know, I'm sure you've seen so much from working with a variety of brands. What do you think are the most important, what's like the most important provision that you would want to see in a contract to protect the influencer?
I think there's so many. But if we're talking about protection, exposure, and things like that, I think that a couple of like provisions come to mind. So I think the first has to do with, you know, what sort of representations and warranties are being made. Because if there's a breach by the brand, then you can, you know, you have some remedies. So I think there's, you know, something to be said about those. But I think in addition to that, you know, we have to think about indemnity and the limitation of liability and how those two, you know, contract terms kind of work together. Sometimes you're seeing limitation of liability clauses that cap the value of this contract, the liability overall, regardless of what's going on, to what's, you know, at stake, which doesn't really make sense if an indemnity provision is kicking in. So I think that's another thing to think about too. So there's actually like a few, I would say really it's representations and warranties, indemnities, because again, that also could influence your indemnity provision, because I can't talk right now. And then the limitation of liabilities, like all of those things have to be in harmony, because I think that there is a huge void of huge, like, you know, red flag if those things are not kind of working together to protect not only the brand, but also the creator.
Yeah, I mean, like this is not in the context of a brand deal for coaches and consultants, where a lot of the stuff is just take it as it is. We're not making any representations, any warranties.
Mm-hmm.
There is a ton of limitation on liability. In fact, everything is disclaimed. It's basically at your own risk.
Right.
So how do you approach a situation like that where it is really so one-sided? Have you ever seen that?
Oh man. Yeah, I have. And what's unfortunate about those situations is that one of two things happens. Like one, we get on a call and we talk about it and we try to work through a solution. And that's great. I love those situations, because I'm not saying that everyone wins or everyone is happy, but maybe there's some balance that's achieved through a call.
Yeah.
However, I've definitely seen a situation where we're dealing with a one-sided contract that needed to be signed yesterday, and there is no room, absolutely no room for red lines. And in that situation, I have to go back to the client and say, look,
yeah,
you have one of two options. You can sign this and, you know, knowing all of the risks, or you can walk away. And I've had situations where both outcomes kind of happen. The client signs and they're just like, it is what it is. Like I'm getting a great, you know, opportunity here, and like I'm willing to accept those risks. And then there's the other, like literally just this morning, I had to say, if this is your position, then we're gonna have to walk away. Like I can't in good conscience like advise my client to sign this. Like it's just not, it's not fair. So
no, it's absolutely. And that's like what ends up happening is, like, obviously, and this is the reality, and I think it's important for everyone to listen to this. So if you are signing an agreement, if it's a good contract and they have a lawyer doing it, like my job is to make the most buttoned up contract for my client. My job is not to advocate for the other side.
No.
I make a lot of the NDAs are they may not have mutual terms, and I wait until the client comes to me and says we need to soften this. Especially with electronic contracts, it's not our job. It is your job as an influencer and as an entrepreneur or as a purchaser of something to understand that. Yeah. And if you want to negotiate certain things, and if you don't want to take it as you want them to make certain representations and warranties, then advocate for yourself. And that's where Veronica comes in.
Yeah. And the reality is that I never say that, like, I'm always like very realistic with, you know, expectations, or even like, what are the chances that, you know, certain things are going to be pushed forward? You know, like that's part of our job as attorneys, right? Is to understand that, one, we as attorneys can't get the other side to agree to what we want. You know, we can only do our best to advocate for you and hopefully get this in a place where everybody kind of has some protections here. Yeah. I think managing expectations is super important in those situations. And also just, again, having that perspective, like you just noted, like that this is just business. This is nothing personal. They're just doing their job. Like they're just trying to protect the client. So we just have to work with what we're given and hopefully achieve an okay result.
Yeah, no, I know. I tell clients, like, look, if they're, because there's some situations where it's like it's an online program and there's no consulting or no extras, and it's like you have to disclaim everything, because with the volume, it's really important you limit your liability. But every once in a while, you are doing a deal where there's a partnership type, which is especially with influencers. There needs to be this double extra level of trust in between you two to have that long-standing relationship. And so it's very, I think, just like fundamental, we're taught as children to if you're going to enter into a relationship, it needs to be it should be mutual.
Yeah, exactly. And that there is some trust, right? I think that, you know, the other thing that's kind of not talked about enough is that, you know, if you're going to go into business with anybody, with a brand, endorsing their products, you have to have some level of trust between who it is that you're working with or who 100%. It is that you're, you know, endorsing. So I just think that it's really true. Like, you really do see there is some like parallels to like just a personal relationship is just, you know, the way that you function and operate there is kind of the way that you function and operate in business in some ways.
And how do you like work out like the intellectual property? Because there's two main assets, right? It's the stuff that the influencers are creating. So it's the assets, it's the content, it's the posts.
Right.
But then also it's the brand's intellectual property.
Yeah.
And there was the Molly Sims case where she was held, you may know this better than I, but basically she was held secondarily liable because she made a post and the IP was infringing. So in that case, as the brand, I want to be really careful about my representations and warranties, because like, what happens if something is considered infringing or we get a demand letter? Like, I may not be able to clear everything. And there's people who come out of the woodwork sometimes. But then if the influencer is going to want to think about, well, what happens if I'm trusting this brand? I'm trusting that their IP that I'm putting my name next to is not infringing. So how do you handle like those two IP things?
I think there's, you know, a few things that can be used to tackle it. I think that, you know, the first has to do with like the ownership section of a contract. Sometimes brands break out ownership and usage. Sometimes they're kind of all lumped into one contract for creators that are just listening, just so you have an idea where to look. So when we're looking at the usage, I think that the first thing exchange is happening, whether or not the brand recognizes some sort of ownership by you, and whether or not you recognize what kind of stuff you're incorporating, and that there is like that division, like, hey, we're licensing our IP for this specific purpose, you're licensing your IP for the specific purpose. So you have that division of ownership. I think the next thing, you know, to also just, again, limit and maybe reduce that exposure has to go into the representations and warranties, right? That, you know, one, the brand's already requiring you to create original content that isn't infringing on anyone's, you know, IP, right? So that should just be mutual, right? There should be something that mirrors that as well, just to, again, have that as a point of reference if there is some sort of breach by the brand. And then, again, informing that indemnity provision, because, again, if there's like some sort of breach of a representation and warranty, then you can kind of just cut it off. So that's kind of how I see it. It's like really just being strategic about, you know, how it is that you see the IP being divided, and then really making sure that in the contract there's some sort of language in there that says, hey, like, you also represent that the IP that we're using isn't infringing, including things like sounds, because that's the other thing that's you know, kind of relevant too. Like, we have to think about like what kind of sounds is the brand requiring you to use too. It's like kind of not thought about enough, which is
crazy, because it's fair use is a nightmare. So like, how many, and if you're a brand, you need to be getting your licenses. Like, if you're a big brand, you should not be using commercial songs, like popular songs. But we could talk about this like all day.
I know, it's like I feel like it's a whole live in and of itself, you know, just talking about how it is that,
because it's tricky, right? Like, because just because you're a brand, right, it's maybe the best practice is to make sure that you have all the clearances. But I'm seeing companies that are on TikTok using like remix songs, and maybe they're not like promoting it's considered editorial, but like the law on this is so gray that I think the takeaway is, if you're a brand, get the clearance. And if you are an influencer, make sure that you have representation warranties and indemnity, and require the brand to get the get the clearances. So it's not on you. You don't have that burden.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I agree. I think that I've seen that a little bit in a few contracts, like that's kind of already contemplated. But more often than not, I'm usually having to just, bundle that in, especially if there's some sort of requirement that a creator use something that's specific, to the brand, along with like its own IP, right? But like a sound, for example, I'm like,
yeah,
that's on you. That's not going to be on my client if you're asking us to incorporate it. Like,
oh my gosh. No, this is so great, Veronica. I'm really glad. Now everyone knows, if you are an influencer or you're doing brand partnerships, Veronica is the go-to person.
yeah.
So
I really liked it.
where can people find you?
So people can find me on Instagram. If you're here viewing it, you basically can look me up as at curator_counsel. It's the same on TikTok, and I've also got a website. So if you have any questions about like services I offer or anything like that, then you can go there. It's still under construction because I'm in the middle of kind of revamping that a little bit, but it should be live by like next week. So
Amazing.
love to see you there. But yeah.
Yay. Thank you. It was so good to see you, Veronica.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for tuning in. We're here every Thursday, 1:00 Eastern time, and we hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye
everybody.
everybody.